Yeah, I know. I'm completely not ready, so let's do this thing.
We don't want lawyers, but we don't know what else to do. We started this, but now I don't understand it and I feel like it's not working. When you're negotiating a separation and you don't want lawyers, if you listen to the last episode of Sara Makes Sense, you might remember what I often tell my clients. I think we're genetically programmed to avoid lawyers. And in this series of episodes, what I want to make clear, when we say things like that, what we're actually avoiding is a legal system that doesn't know us and doesn't care. We're trying to maintain control in what feels like an uncontrollable situation. We're trying to maintain some level of dignity, respect, and decency when we're hurt, angry, and confused. In this episode of Sara Makes Sense, my guest is a mediator, a word and a career choice that we may have heard of but don't fully understand. In this episode of Sara Makes Sense, my guest is a mediator, a word and a career choice that we may have heard of but don't fully understand. And this mediator doesn't just work with people who want to end their marriage or their partnership. This mediator works in that space that we almost never talk about. I don't want to get divorced, but I don't want to be married to you like this space. Today, Jennifer Sanders of Sanders Mediation is with me. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me today.
I'm so glad you made time for this. I'm really excited for my listeners to be able to hear you talk about your role and why you've chosen it. And so I'm going to let you introduce yourself and your practice.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very passionate about mediation, so any opportunity to speak about it, I do think it's such an important area. So I am a family law mediator. I work in Ontario. I'm based in the Niagara region, but I do virtual mediation with video conferencing. So I do have clients all throughout the province of Ontario. My main role with my clients is I do help clients who are going through a separation and sometimes have already gone through a separation and then are rejigging their parenting plan. So
Okay.
I help them look at the legal aspects. We do everything from collecting financials, going through property division, and then working out a parenting plan. And I write that up for them. And then the other area of my practice that you were alluding to is something called marital mediation, where I do work with clients who are in a pretty rough place in their marriage, but they're not sure that they want to separate, or they may be separating, but not necessarily to head for a divorce. They think a separation is necessary, but they want to give the marriage a chance. And so I do use mediation techniques in that situation as well.
Okay. So I'd like to start maybe a little bit at the beginning because I find when I'm talking to clients or prospective clients who have contacted me because they're separating, they often aren't clear on what a mediator can do versus working with lawyers.
Mhm.
I think in some way we have this idea of if you're separating or divorcing, you hire a lawyer and you go to court. And I think in a lot of ways that's probably the least common way that families separate, but that's kind of the picture in our heads. So can you just talk to me a little bit? So you mediate, you're working for both people. Just explain kind of how you work with people.
Sure. Yeah. And it's a great question because most people, I think, don't understand mediation or what it's about. The calls that I get are often from people. Even if they know they want to try using a mediator, they still don't really know exactly what it is. So the calls
Right.
are sort of sound something like, I need to understand mediation or I'm looking for a mediator. What is that? So definitely it's an area that we still need a lot more education about and awareness about. So there's lots of differences. When someone works with a lawyer is only going to be representing their interests. So they're going to give them legal advice just in their best interest and work with their client. It's often going to become adversarial because right away that communication between those parties really stops and goes through the lawyers. So there even in a situation where it wasn't particularly high conflict, there's literally no opportunity for any sort of conflict resolution or finding sort of alternative resolutions to happen because now the communication is happening through lawyers. So with a mediator, I represent both parties. I
Okay.
begin by meeting with each of them individually just to understand things from their perspective. So I always tell people I'm not interested in trying to figure out who's right and who's wrong. I'm not a judge or an arbiter. I'm not going to give them any legal advice, but really want to understand what's important to them. What do they want to see come out of this separation? What are some of their big concerns and their goals out of mediation? And then we start in joint sessions. So people are coming together right away. We're discussing things in real time, not via email, but together in these sessions. I don't provide legal advice, but I do provide a lot of legal information. So I am trained in family law in Ontario and the Divorce Act of Canada. So I do let people know, what typical legal precedent is, the different areas that should be included in an agreement. And I help facilitate communication between them.
Okay. And so I'd like to go back just to, you mentioned communication a couple of times in there.
Mhm.
And I think, where you started, you're right, that traditional model of, um, I hire a lawyer, my spouse hires a lawyer, and then the communication doesn't happen necessarily between us, but it happens between the lawyers.
Yep.
And sometimes some of the calls that I get from my separation families, because I work with families who use a variety of ways to separate, sometimes the phone call is really just prompted by, I just opened this email and why is it so hostile?
Yes.
Because I didn't think we were there. And I think, again, that traditional legal model, um, the lawyers can sound very inflammatory depending on how the lawyer works, the lawyer's style. One of my clients right now is working in a more traditional model, and he certainly has a very traditional lawyer. And we debriefed after a call, and he said, I felt like I was just arguing with my own lawyer.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
had to say, you were.
Right.
And again, it's and I think for them, it's really in a lot of ways a personality mismatch. But I think when we think of that traditional separation model, it is all of a sudden the people involved are more separated
Yes.
and somebody else is handling the communication.
Yes.
I think, my previous episode talked with Dave Morneau, who practices family law, but in a more collaborative
Yes.
way,
I know, Dave.
a more
Yeah.
formally collaborative
Yeah.
way. And, there are some ways, again, that you can get a conversation happening so it doesn't feel like somebody's email bombing you.
Yeah, I think that, even there are obviously some wonderful family law lawyers, and there's many that I tend to work with that, want to be more collaborative. They don't want to be adversarial. But even in the best of situations, you are still communicating, like you said, via email. You're typically having your lawyer communicate on your behalf. If things are going to take longer, maybe that email, you don't know what frame of mind the other person's in when they're receiving that email or how they may interpret it. So those are even the
Right.
best case situations when you don't have a lawyer who is very adversarial. And I definitely do have, those lawyers are out there. I definitely do have clients coming to me who are literally scared after having consultations where things are fairly amicable with their ex, but they've happened to contact a lawyer who is very adversarial and advising them that, they better not do this and they should do this and they better protect this and or else this is going to happen. And, the person is
Right.
just, so scared of the entire situation where they don't need to be. So I think for sure when
Okay.
we get in that room together in mediation, even just the time frame of it. I mean, having to go, like, if you have a question or a discrepancy when you're working out agreements between lawyers, that can take months of emailing sometimes to
Okay.
work it out, right? Where literally, like, it's not uncommon for me to work out an entire parenting plan in one session because we're just right in the session having a discussion about it. I take them through the topics, I write it as we go.
Okay.
So it's just efficient as well.
Right. So again, I think it's that space where everybody's there
Yeah.
and you're also there to almost, it sounds like, interpret what they're looking for. And if one person's saying something different than the other person, are you able to kind of clarify for them?
So absolutely. I mean, that's also what I am. I'm trained in conflict resolution. So for sure, I get clients that are very high conflict
Okay.
and, they might be expressing things in an adversarial way themselves. They may be asking for things that frankly, are unreasonable within the laws of Ontario, right? So you will get people sometimes making
Okay.
demands that aren't in the best interest of the kids, or would result in an extremely inequitable situation for them. So, absolutely, I will ask questions, we'll figure out where that's coming from. And really, it's about making sure that each person can clearly communicate their own issues and their concerns. And then also at the same time that they're hearing the other person.
Okay.
So, there's definitely a lot of different sort of tools in my toolbox of conflict resolution, and I have people screaming and yelling all the time in mediation. It happens, but we figure it out. Yeah, we figure it out.
Okay. Because sometimes when people are asking me questions, it seems like they've already ruled out mediation on their own because they have the impression that the only way mediation is going to work is if they can be nice to each other.
Yes, I think that's probably the
Do you
biggest, yeah, misconception. Yeah, I think that's the biggest misconception about mediation. That I get that all the time. That people think that it has to be amicable. And in some ways, I think, the biggest benefit of the people that are going to benefit the most from mediation are the people that are high conflict, because they are the people that are going to, possibly bankrupt themselves in court. They're going to be hashing it out forever, and
Okay.
they can get the biggest benefit from mediation. I'm not a magician, but I'm trained in
Right.
in conflict resolution. It's not uncommon that I have clients, they want to make it work, but they will start that session with, the over my dead body freeze, or yelling, or saying I'm going to court if you don't do this. But when we unpack it, we figure it out in most situations.
Okay. And I think probably the second hesitation that some of my clients talk to me about, if they haven't chosen how they're going to kind of do the legal separation document, sometimes one person will say to me, I'm worried about mediation because my partner just has a stronger personality, or,
Mm.
my partner, I've actually heard my partner's in sales and I'm just, there's this single person and I'm worried that my partner's going to be the favorite one and I'm going to kind of get run over by this process.
Right.
How do you handle that? Does that ever happen in your office?
It does. Yeah, it does. So a couple things. I definitely have clients that are concerned. I've heard that as well, right? He puts on a good show, or she's very convincing, and I'm
Yeah.
worried that, you're going to be swayed. So a couple things. One, I say, my response to that is, you get to make the decisions in mediation. Like, I'm not going to be telling you what you should do. So you really need to just be more concerned that you're not going to be swayed by them, right? Like, you are able to say yes or no. I'm not a judge, so I'm not going to be saying, "Oh, I think he presented a good argument. He wins."
Right.
So that's, one side of it. And then it is also a big part of my job, and I constantly do this throughout the process of making sure that there is a fair balance of power.
Okay.
So I do get those strong personalities, definitely. And sometimes I will speak to one person individually, or speak to them both individually, if I feel that someone is making a decision under duress, or are just being so, bullied and beaten down, that they're making a decision that really is not fair for them. Um, and sometimes that looks like me speaking to them and just getting a sense of, okay, are they fully informed of what they're doing? And in some situations where it seems like it could be headed in a pretty inequitable situation, I will encourage them just to get legal advice.
Mhm.
So to speak to a lawyer, just to make sure, do you understand what your rights are in this situation? Then if you're still happy to make this choice, then that's fine.
Okay. So again, I just want to circle back because this
Hmm.
actually came up in my previous episode where Dave Morneau was talking just about the ability to help a family where there has been, um, either financial control, physical abuse, or just kind of that real, you mentioned power imbalance.
Hmm.
And so there are times in relationships where, we're just not being fair with each other for a number of reasons, and where there has been a level of abuse. And can you just talk a little bit about, it doesn't sound to me like you gloss over that.
No, I think that definitely if people are involved in those situations, they want to find a mediator who has experience and skill with domestic violence and understanding screening. It should be part of any mediator's training, but some people have, more experience than others. And when I spoke about those individual meetings, like that's part of why those are very important. And part of those meetings is to identify, is there mental illness at play here? Is there domestic violence? Is there financial abuse going on? So, all of those things based on those meetings, then I will sort of figure out what makes sense in this situation. So I have had some situations where I felt where it was the woman who there was some domestic violence. I felt and she had clearly explained that she had a good amount of agency. She wanted to use mediation. She understood what her rights are. She had met with a lawyer. She felt like she would get the best outcomes in mediation.
Okay.
So we worked together to make sure that she had a safety plan. She spoke to the local women's shelter and got a safety plan. She had already gotten legal advice with a consultation from a lawyer. So making sure that the kids are safe, everyone is safe for the process. Checking in as well during mediation to figure out, okay, are you in separate residences while mediation is happening? So it's not going to set off, a potentially dangerous situation. But
Yeah.
I think that, it's really important to understand what mediation can do because often in these types of situations, which are predominantly women, they would be left in the court system with not many options,
Right.
not having the resources, right, to be able to fight it out in court. So they can often get better outcomes through mediation. But like I said, it needs to be dealt with quite carefully and with very specific parameters.
Okay. So again, I think just that idea of keeping both people safe
Hmm.
with the goal of letting the family kind of reshape itself now that they're not living together.
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
that's been really important. I know with my work, sometimes I do work with both people, and I think that's I think similar to you, I often get clients, when I speak to them individually first, um, you can feel a little bit of uh, some of their comments are leaning towards the, "Can you please tell me I'm right?"
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
"Can I be
Hmm.
right? And can
Hmm.
the other one be wrong?"
Hmm.
And, but I think I always tell them, "My goal for you is that both of you coming through this and coming out of this, it's important to me that you're both financially stable because financially stable parents are just better parents."
Hmm.
But there's that idea of, as much as possible, giving everybody a safe space,
Yep. Yep.
no matter what's happened or which side you're on. So it's not about who's right and who's wrong.
Yep.
It's about, here's where you are,
Yep.
and how do we, as safely as possible, get you from here to there?
Yes. And I think what I have been trying to incorporate into my practice more and more and more and rely very heavily on in these types of situations, which I don't know is happening with most lawyers. It's not my sense, but I'm not sure, is bring in those other resources. So in some cases, I will insist that, we've had this individual meeting, these high, risk issues have been identified. So you're going to make the safety plan and then come back to me, let me know. We're going to get the kids into some counseling throughout this. We're going to, I'm going to insist that you do talk to a financial advisor. So we can also use mediation to kind of get those healthy supports in place. I do also talk about, what support system do you have? Do you have family around? Like, where's the childcare? So we can bring in a lot more of those resources too. So I think it does have the potential to be a much more holistic approach to support that family and those kids ultimately, which is who we all care about, moving forward.
Right. Okay. And so you've mentioned lawyers in here a couple of times, saying that you will recommend that sometimes, depending on the situation, that one or both people that are working with you meet with a lawyer as well.
Mhm.
Um, so can you just also talk a little bit about, to get to a signed agreement, do your clients always meet with a lawyer at some point?
They don't always. I think a lot of my clients, they're using mediation because they don't want to see lawyers. They don't like in their mind, lawyers are bad and they're not. They're definitely not all bad. But in their mind, lawyers are bad. They're costly. They think, it will spiral if they go for lawyers. So they don't want to. But I always make it a part of beginning mediation, and people sign a contract to mediate with me, explaining that at any time in the process, you're encouraged to get legal advice. So it doesn't mean that you need to retain a lawyer, but you may pay them, just for an hour long consultation and just explain your situation about certain topics. So for me, the most common ones are if there's a lot of money on the table and particularly part of an agreement that's going to really have long term effects for someone. So something like spousal support, where it's a very gray area, hard to decide, lots of factors. I will often, I always need to, it's part of my job making sure that people are making informed choices. And
Okay.
sometimes with spousal, people are doing very little research. They're not really considering enough factors and they're willing to decide on spousal. So at the end of the day, if they're insisting, then they can do that. But I will sometimes really strongly suggest, go get some legal advice before you make some final decisions on this and then come back to mediation. So they don't need to stop
Okay.
mediation or retain a lawyer, but
Right.
just, yeah, just getting some legal advice.
Okay. So almost, in some ways a second opinion, but in some ways just really an explanation of, here's the legal system in Ontario
Hmm.
that governs kind of the taking apart of a marriage, because a marriage is a legal event. Sometimes we forget that
Hmm.
that it was a legal
Hmm.
event up front, and so to take it apart properly is also actually a legal event,
Hmm.
and because of that, we do have laws around that.
Yes.
But often I tell my clients, it's the Family Law Act is kind of like a big ballpark, and there is room for you to move in there,
Yes.
but I need you in the ballpark. I do Please don't be outside of the ballpark.
Yeah, good, exactly. Good analogy. And I do, I mean, to use that example again of spousal, I mean, we go through the spousal support calculator, we use income, we collect income disclosure, we go through and look at what the ranges are. So I do, let them know in mediation of what legal precedent is and kind of inform them. But yes, a lawyer would be more giving that advice specific to them. So a lawyer might say, I don't think you should do this way. You should do it that way, something like that.
Okay.
Um, to be really honest too, with my clients, like I rarely have clients come back and say, oh, no, my lawyer said I should do this instead. It's not, it's more, I think, for people's peace of mind and just to make sure again that they are making an informed choice.
And I think that peace of mind part is very, very important. I know in the work that I do, families who are separating is about 30 to 50% of my work in any given year.
Hmm.
And so I also work with families who aren't separating. And in planning, if my non-separation families intended to save $8,000 a year and they miss that goal for a couple of years, we can probably figure out how to get them back on track.
Right.
But in this situation, once an agreement is signed and assets are divided and support is agreed on, it's actually really difficult to go back
Yes, of course it
and
is.
do
Yeah.
that, and so I try to make that clear that, again, in my non-separation planning, we can often shift things around. We can, figure out how to, okay, you missed this target, but now it looks like this, so we can still do this. But this is really a big, huge transaction that I don't want them having regret over later,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
and I certainly don't want them to feel like I never would have signed this if I had known X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
Of course, yeah. So me, I always I'm continually evaluating in all of my files, and that's one of the sort of, measures that I go by is like, okay, is this person well informed? Like, do they have all the facts? Is there more information that would help them make a better choice? Does it seem like they are considering the information? So that's always a really big consideration of when I would advise legal advice, or insist on legal advice, or strongly advise legal advice, or just kind of talk about it a little bit longer. Sometimes I feel like we need to kind of circle back and look at the facts again and just make sure that the person is well aware of the choice that they're making.
Right. And do you find that your clients, again, this is a big process with a lot of emotion in it. Um,
Hmm.
do you find that you maybe feel like they're almost done, and then somebody comes back and sounds like they're saying, "Wait, I don't think I like any of this."
That honestly has almost never happened because of legal advice, because I think, we do a pretty good job keeping it, like you said, within that ballpark. So we're not,
Right.
going crazy in one direction or the other.
Do you ever find though that people, it's almost like they hit a point of overwhelm and they almost need a reminder of, "These are what you told me your goals were.
Mhm.
These are the decisions already. Are you still okay with that?"
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
one thing that we do in mediation, right? We start identifying the goals, financial goals, plans for the family, plans for how you want to co-parent. And so sometimes, yeah, we can get away from those. I mean, the nice thing about mediation is that it doesn't tend to go on a long time in mediation. The vast majority of my files, we meet 3 times in joint sessions. Yeah, which I
Okay.
think helps as well. So it's not a really long drawn out process.
That is good because I think the whole taking apart of a marriage or a partnership, I think for the people involved feels like a very long drawn out process.
I think that that's fair, because I'm thinking of one file that I had last year, and they weren't particularly high conflict, but they were talkers, and they ended up going 5 sessions, which again is unusual.
Yep.
But by the end, definitely there's fatigue there, and I think when you've gone longer and you've gone past the expectation. So one of the parties thought that they were going to be done in like 2 hours, right? They just thought
Right.
it was going to be much shorter. There's definitely a fatigue there where I do have to check in as a mediator, because then you do get people sort of saying, okay, whatever, just fine, just do it. I just want to be done.
Right.
And I have to make sure I'm checking in those situations as well. 'Cause when everyone says that, my radar goes up, right? We can't have someone making a decision just because they're fed up. So sometimes we'll take a little break, or I'll just make sure I'm checking in enough to make sure they really understand what they're doing.
Okay. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about it's come up a couple of times, this idea of marital mediation. So
Hmm.
I think, and you and I have talked about this, we're a very black and white society.
Hmm.
And I think we find it very difficult to um, either, if we're the ones in the situation, talk about it, or if we're close to somebody in a situation, it's hard to listen to somebody when they're saying, my marriage is in trouble or my relationship is in trouble. I can't stay like this, but I don't want to divorce. I think people often feel pushed
Right.
to either stay together, so kind of shut up and just deal with whatever you're dealing with, or get divorced because I don't
Hmm.
want to hear you whine about this anymore.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think, um, I think that idea of could we create as advisors, can we create a different space for couples so that they can truly decide what's best for them and what's possible for them?
Hmm. I think you're right. I think there's not a lot of resources. There is marriage counseling, of course, and relationship counseling, but which can be life changing for some people. I think to talk about marital mediation, we kind of have to talk about that for a second because sort
Okay.
of what marital mediation isn't. So I think with traditional couples counseling, marriage counseling, there's a few things that happens. One is that you really need to find a therapist that is a fit for you because they all do have different approaches,
Yes.
different techniques, right? With some of them, you're going to be meeting dozens of times. With some of, and talking. Some of them is going to be more acute issues. Some of them are going to give you homework. Some are going to tell you books to read. Like they all have their different ways of working. I definitely have had clients come to me who had therapists who told them their opinions outright. You're wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. You're wrecking your marriage. You should be doing this. So, and they felt that they
Okay.
had not understood the situation. They didn't really get it right and kind of made it worse. So again, similar to lawyers, don't want to bash relationship counselors at all. There's amazing ones there, but I think when couples are in these really brutal situations where they just need a little bit of hope and they just want to feel like they're making some progress and some steps forward, um,
Mhm.
it can be frustrating in marriage counseling because often that doesn't happen quickly, or you may not find a good match for you right away.
Right.
So I say that marriage counseling probably still needs to happen, relationship therapy still needs to happen, but mediation is a way that, again, it goes back to communicating. So looking at, okay, let's pick some of these key issues. What are you fighting about? Like let's pick one of these key issues. What's your goal here? Is the goal to get along? Is the goal to co-parent? Is the goal to have an amicable separation while you figure out what you want to do? Like we figure out the goals and then we do figure out, we again going back to communicating, so helping make sure that each person can communicate their needs, what they're upset about, what their issues are, and then they're also being listened to. So that's a
Right.
big part of it, right? So in typically, I mean, I meet with people all the time where they will say to me, I've tried and tried and tried. I've done every single thing I can about, let's certain issue. And then I meet with the other party and they say, they do nothing.
Right.
They ignore it. They haven't done anything. Right. So it's just this, it's a communication issue.
Mhm.
So it's so eye-opening even in some of those first sessions, just being able to have a little bit of clear communication about whatever the issue is. And then in marital mediation, we set some really clear goals. So if we take an example, I'm sure as you know, Sarah, lots of people fight about money. That's one of the most
They do.
yeah, common things. So let's say a couple is, they're constantly fighting about money, budgeting, someone spends too much, someone's too frugal, whatever. We spend time talking about that, right? Can you explain why you're upset about this? Or why do you need a budget? Why is a budget important to you? And we really have that communication. And then I help them both decide. So it's not me imposing their goals or boundaries on each other, but they both decide, okay, what would it look like if you made a budget? When would you feel comfortable doing that? How should that happen? By when should that happen? How do you want to sit down and do that? And they set the goals and then they decide, their own sort of homework and their own sort of goals and steps and markers and what those are going to be. I document that in progress notes. And then we meet again and we look at, okay, how did it go? You agreed to do a budget. Did you do it? And if you didn't do it, let's talk about why not. Um, yeah, so I think that in marital mediation, what tends to happen is it's very clarifying for people who are in that super mixed up space of not knowing, is this marriage worth saving? Is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with the other person? Is it better to stay for their kids? Because I feel like what tends to happen fairly quickly in marital mediation is that either they will start to get some pretty clear steps forward. So in the financial example, the budget will get made
Right.
and they'll have a little win there, right? Okay, we made the budget. We had a few hiccups, but we did it. And we both had parameters we agreed to. Or what happens is the budget didn't get made and one person has no intention of making that budget and one person is really not in it. And sometimes that is for reasons of an addiction or a mental health issue, or one person really is done.
Mhm.
They're not in it. So I do find that marital mediation can be very clarifying when people are in that stressful spot.
Right, and it seems to me, because I have worked with some couples in that spot, um,
Hmm.
it seems to me one of the important things is that they have a professional who's willing to let them not know what they want,
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
right? And is
Yep.
willing to, let them be in this "I don't know" zone.
Yep, that's important. And that can be part of the discussion too, right? Like, okay, do you want to give this 3 months or 6 months and what do things need to look like for you in that time?
Mhm.
And it's something that they both are a part of, right? So it's not me. I am really a neutral party helping them facilitate. So my style or my fit for them, as long as I'm a skilled mediator, is not as important as it would be when choosing a therapist. You need a good mediator, but it's really each of you making those choices of what is best for you.
Right. I just again, I think we want people in one bucket or the other bucket. We want them married or not married, and
Yeah.
I think sometimes there is just that third space so that they can truly decide what they want, what's possible, um, and then again, make a decision knowing that they've really looked at all of the options.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's a really important point too, because a lot of people are not protected or not aware during a separation, and a separation goes south, a separation that could be helpful for a marriage. So if people are saying, "Okay, we do need space," it's usually not because there aren't parameters set. We don't neither party understands like, well, okay, are we seeing other people now? Like, is our marriage done? Are we having date night once a week? Are we going to counts? Like, what is happening here? So,
Right.
if we set parameters of like, hey, we're in a really bad spot, we want to make it work. Here's what we're agreeing we need to do to try to make this work, and we're going to reevaluate at this time. So it kind of just lowers that tension level and lets people, like you said, kind of live in that gray area.
Is there anything else that we haven't talked about today that feels really important, or is something that you deal with often? Is there something we haven't covered yet?
Good question. I think honestly that we did talk about that really biggest misconception of people just thinking that there's all these reasons why they can't use mediation. And I think that I'm always surprised when people at least don't try it, because even when you look at the difference in cost to going the lawyer route or to even trying mediation, I was just talking with a colleague about this yesterday, that even to go through most of my files from start to finish are like the ranges between 2 to 4,000 total, start to finish, completely done
Right.
for both parties total, right? So you're never going to have fees like that using the legal system, fees that low. So I feel like it's worth it to even just try. Even if you don't have high hopes for mediation, it makes a lot of sense even to just try it out and see if it would be a fit. Just because the time and cost risk is so low.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I think that's really helpful, and I'm really hoping that this gives my listeners a sense of, what's possible rather again than defaulting to we need lawyers and this is going to be awful.
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't have to be awful. It wasn't me. I'm not going to take credit for this. It was a mentor that I worked with, but she had a quote that I guess wasn't hers either, that, don't cut what you can untie,
Yes.
right? You loved each other at one time. You had children probably with this person. You had a romance. You fell in love. You did have a marriage. And to be able to, mediation is going to give you the opportunity to end that with some dignity
Right.
and, be able to move forward, whether you have a new relationship, you want to move forward, you want to move forward co-parenting. It's hard to do that when you're leaving behind a flaming wreckage, right? You want to think about your own future goals and to be able to end that in a dignified way, in a peaceable way. And I do see it all the time. I see people who, there's been affairs, there's been abuse, there's been a lot of hurt, but still, they can get through it in a dignified manner.
Yes. Yes. And I love everything you just said. And it's going to be really interesting because you have not heard me record the opener yet, but you use
Okay.
most of the words that I have for my opener. So thank you so much.
Okay.
And again,
Wonderful,
thanks
wonderful.
for your time today, Jennifer. I really appreciate you just explaining why you do what you do and how it can be helpful for families.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was a joy. I really, like I said, I'm so passionate about this topic, and yeah, I love to speak with people about it.
In life, we all have pieces scattered here and there. When you're starting to negotiate a separation, it feels like there are more pieces, unfamiliar and unknowable pieces, and really, really public pieces that used to be private. What I hope you took from today, if you're in this situation or you know someone who is, there is professional help available wherever you are, where you don't end up chewed up by a system, where you can find the space to figure out what you want, both individually and as a couple, and how you're going to get from here to there. From time to time, we need someone who can cut through the noise. Someone who not only gets to know you as a person, but also can really show and make sense of your financial plan. And not just the numbers, but what the numbers truly mean for you. This relationship, this plan belongs to you, not your planner. I'm Sara McCullough. Thank you for listening to Sara Makes Sense.
The information in this podcast is intended for general information and illustrative purposes. For advice relevant to your specific situation, meet with a qualified financial planner, lawyer, or accountant before making any changes to your situation. Sara's designations and licensing include Certified Financial Planner, Registered Financial Planner, Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, and holding an insurance license.